While the world was watching Washington, Canada just quietly signed away America's trade leverage. On July 2nd, 2026, Prime Minister Mark Carney and BC Premier David Eby unlocked over $200 billion in new investment. And buried inside that deal is a strategy that could permanently shift Pacific trade away from US ports. This is the story mainstream media isn't connecting the dots on. The deal. In Vancouver, Carney and Eby signed the Canada-British Columbia Cooperative Prosperity Agreement, a federal commitment north of $20 billion, aimed at unlocking over $200 billion in total investment across the province. Eby called it a generational path to prosperity. But strip away the political language, and this is Canada building permanent infrastructure to reduce its economic dependence on the United States. One port, one pipeline, one mine, and one power line at a time. Roberts Bank, the port that bypasses America. The centerpiece is a $10 billion federal upgrade to the Roberts Bank terminal at the Port of Vancouver, Canada's largest container and bulk export facility. The federal government says this single investment unlocks $100 billion in new trade capacity and adds roughly $3 billion to Canada's economy every year. Roberts Bank connects directly to CN and CP rail lines, pulling goods from across Western Canada, meaning more Canadian exports can reach Asia without ever touching a US port or a US rail line. That's not an accident. That's redundancy. Canada engineering an export pathway that doesn't need America at all. The tunnel nobody could build. For a decade, BC politicians promised and then canceled a replacement for the aging Massey Tunnel, now officially renamed the Fraser River Tunnel Project. Ottawa just committed up to $3 billion, covering roughly a third of the cost, to finally upgrade it from 4 lanes to 8. This tunnel is the only road link feeding trucks and freight into the Roberts Bank corridor. Without it, the port upgrade is half finished. With it, Canada has a complete, uninterrupted freight pipeline from farm to ship. No American middleman required. The power line behind the curtain. Almost nobody is talking about this part, but it matters just as much. The North Coast Transmission Line is getting $3.9 billion in federal financing to carry clean hydro and wind power from northern BC out to the coast. Without this line, none of the LNG terminals or mineral processing plants planned for the region can actually run on clean electricity. This is the invisible backbone, the thing that makes every other project on this list physically possible. Infrastructure people never see is usually the infrastructure that decides who wins. LNG and the race against US gas exports. Here's where it gets serious for American energy dominance. The agreement fast-tracks permitting for 5 separate LNG projects at once: LNG Canada Phase 2, Kasai Lissams, Cedar LNG, Woodfibre LNG, and the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Line. LNG Canada Phase 2 alone is backed by Shell, Petronas, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, and KOGAS. Kasai Lissams has already locked in a supply deal with Germany's SEFE. Translation: Canada is racing to become a direct LNG supplier to Asia and Europe, markets the US has spent a decade trying to dominate. Every ton of Canadian LNG that reaches Rotterdam or Tokyo is the ton America didn't sell. The copper play. Then there's Red Chris, a $500 million federal investment to expand this mine, boosting Canada's national copper output by more than 15%. Copper sits on every Western nation's critical minerals list. It's in EVs, defense electronics, and power grids. At a moment when the US and its allies are desperately trying to cut China out of critical mineral supply chains, Canada just made itself a bigger, cleaner alternative, right next door to the US market, and increasingly independent of it. The pipeline trade-off. The most politically loaded moment came from Eby directly. We recognize our constitutional position, and we do not have the authority to stop a pipeline. We will not be going to court to fight a pipeline project. That single sentence ends nearly a decade of BC-Alberta conflict. In exchange, the northern tanker ban stays permanently in place, and Alberta's proposed pipeline has now shifted to a south coast route, following the existing Trans Mountain corridor. Alberta gets its pipeline. BC gets to say it never surrendered the coast it promised to protect. And Canada, as a whole, gets a second oil export route to world markets that doesn't run through the United States. What this actually means for the US. Zoom out, and the pattern is unmistakable. For decades, the US has held quiet leverage over Canada simply by being the easiest, closest trading partner. Every one of these projects, the port, the tunnel, the power line, the LNG terminals, the pipeline, is designed to make that leverage smaller. Canada isn't cutting ties with America, it's just making sure it's no longer the only option. That's a slow motion shift, but it's the kind that changes trade negotiations for the next 30 years. This isn't just an infrastructure announcement. It's Canada quietly building the tools to negotiate with America as an equal, not a dependent. If you think this reshapes the US-Canada trade relationship, drop a comment and subscribe, because we're tracking exactly how this plays out over the next year.